Well, everybody, welcome to what I think will be the most practical. There's a lot of buy into this session. We're going to talk about how to buy a home. And before I even start and introduce our amazing guests here this morning, the heart behind this is, it's really imperative, is the truth is we want to set you guys up outside of the four walls of church just as much as we do inside of the four walls of church. And today we're like, okay, how can we help young people buy their first home? Is it impossible to buy a first home in Sydney still today? We're going to unpack some myths and go from there. But I think our heart behind it is essentially to set every single one of you guys up for what will be the biggest wins, not just in your life, but in your financial life. So we're going to introduce our guests here. Yeah, I think we've got probably 3.5 hours of content questions for Felix in particular. So, we're going to get this done in the next hour and a half. So let's jump into it. Felix.
Hi Drew, how are you?
Yeah, mate, I'm good. I'm personally honoured. A little bit of a fanboy here. So Felix, do you want to tell us what you do and how this all came about?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Drew. So I actually work as a property specialist. My focus and my goal is to really understand and help clients or people who are looking for their first home and identify what that looks like and really pretty much help them customize that journey along that way. Whether it be your first home or an investment property, or even you're looking to build a portfolio, my role is to really just sit down and listen, to really understand what you're looking for and then actually go out and source that. So that's what I do as a profession. I actually go to the Inner West Hillsong, so brilliant.
Shout out!
Yeah, one of the kingdom builders as well. So but you know, but yeah, love church, love people, love helping people find their family home, and it's such a great and rewarding experience when you see people walk into their first home and you're able to celebrate that with them. So just even today, I was just dropping off a housewarming gift for a client. I bought a house for a month ago and just sitting down and having tea with them, and it's just seeing them settled in and just enjoying that space. It just makes that work so much more enjoyable.
So good.
So yeah.
I love that. I remember even just before we go to Dan said what you're most passionate about is getting young couples into their first home and setting them up financially. Yeah. And so I think there'll be a lot of people in here. We've got people from about 16 all the way to about 36 and everywhere in between. And this will be very helpful for them. So thank you so much for coming in.
No worries.
Dan Purdy-Smith, a man who really does need no introduction. He's done pretty much everything financial savvy, financial freedom, budgets for our leadership teams over the years. He's our financial stewardship pastor. But also he's an athlete of a human being. Dan, anything you want to say to the people?
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you, Drew.
I'm sorry.
It's great. First of all, it's great to be your neighbour, pretty much. Drew, Virginia are going to be moving in down the road from us. Nice. So, I don't know what to expect, but I'm sure it'll be great. No, great to be here. Look, Drew mentioned it, the capacity in our church in which I serve is I'm on staff as a stewardship pastor. So I love that our church, I love that Pastors Brian and Bobby have the heart to have this role in our church. The idea of this role is to see people build strength in their personal finances and to get ahead, whether that's learning how to budget, maybe set financial goals, whether it is learning how to buy property or getting out of debt, just really building strength so that we can not be overwhelmed, stressed or buried by finances, but we can see it as a tool to do a lot of good and be positioned to do that. And I love it. I love that I get to serve in this area, and I absolutely love talking to young people about all things related to finance. So really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, same. And Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy.
28 today, ladies and gentlemen.
Birthday girl.
She said this is her birthday gift, just so you know.
Gift. It is.
Sitting next to me?
Well, low-key, yes. She said she'd freak out too much next to Felix. We needed a buffer. So Nancy's 28 today, and talk to us about this panel, why you're personally interested.
Yeah, well, I feel like this is more of a personal instrument here, because 28, married with a baby. We're currently in that stage at the moment where we want to buy a house, but we don't know how to do it, where to look. So this is very beneficial for me personally, but that's me.
Well, that's everyone here. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And so I think the biggest challenge personally, I touched on this before, is keeping all this content to a time, because before we even pressed record, we were just, well, when I say we, Felix was just flowing. There's just wisdom coming. But let's jump right into it. Felix, you're in the property game.
Yep.
You have been for quite a while right now. We touched on it before, but can you tell us how you got into this?
Yeah, sure.
How it came about?
Yeah. So I actually started investing in property at probably the age of 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
20.
Look, I mean, coming from an Asian family, like it's kind of been drilled in you, like property is the thing that you need to go to, right? And so my parents were always kind of, talking around property and you should get into it, but we never really kind of got anywhere because they were quite time poor. They ran a bakery, and so they didn't have the opportunity to go out there. And it all kind of came together one time when my dad was out shopping and he met one of his mates, which came to Australia at the same time from Cambodia. They both had a bakery, been established for about probably 20 years. And he was just talking to him and he said, "Oh, where are you off to?" And he said, "Oh, I'm off to Queensland next week." And my dad's like, "Oh, what are you doing there?" And he said, "Look, I'm just settling on probably 10 properties." And my dad's like, "Wow, like how'd you afford to buy 10, right?" And then he came home and he just shared with me what was happening. And I'm like, "Dad, like we've got nothing, like, okay, great, we've got our family home and we've got some cash savings, but we haven't got any assets." And I'm like, "What is he doing differently?" I go, "Can you just call him and ask him if I can come along?" And so he was quite open to it. So I spent the weekend up in Queensland with him, and it just made so much sense, right? So I was there and he was like buying stuff for 150,000 back then. This is going back probably 20 years. And it'd rent for 250. And when you do the numbers straight away, because I was in finance, like, hey, this is looking after itself. So literally I came back, told my brother, told my parents, I go, "This is what he's doing. Like, we got to get on this boat," right? And then I told my wife, my now wife, I said, like, "You're working, let's put this to good use." And so literally it was funny because we booked a flight literally the next week later, and like back then I didn't have much of an income, so working in my parents' business was part-time, so we had to like get a car. We rented from a place called Rent a Bomb, and we're like, can't be that bad, right? And it was like, you literally get a bomb. I don't know if you guys were like, those cars where you need a choker start, right? Like that's how old, and we're like choke starting the car in the morning. But literally we spent a week in Queensland. We bought properties anywhere from 130 up to 200,000. And I remember that week we bought 5 properties. So, and that's how it all started. Right?
It's not a bad week.
Not a bad week in the market.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. It just felt like, it felt a lot cheaper up there, obviously, but it just made a lot of sense. And like back then, I didn't know exactly where to target, but I had a fair idea in terms of what to look out for based on what my dad's friend showed me. But from what I know today, and if I could implement all that information that I know now to back then, I would have bought in much better places. But even so, that kickstarted everything. Like from those purchases, after 12 months, properties went up. We were able to refinance, buy more properties. And then eventually we sold some and used those deposits to buy in Castle Hill, built a house, and then from there we used equity there and bought more properties. So it kind of just built that whole portfolio for us. And really, I just feel like I want to be able to share what I've learned with others, because ultimately at a young age, at 20, it's almost that Australian dream where people think it's unattainable anymore. But it doesn't mean you have to buy in your backyard. It's all about, utilising, understanding your finances, like which Dan talks a lot about budgeting and understand, do you have enough to sustain those repayments, but buying within your means. So that's probably the big thing,
Yeah, fantastic. I just love is like, "Dad, I want to go Queensland this week." Next week, buys 5 houses, as you do. Okay, so I guess I'm listening here thinking, cool, I'm here to learn more than I am to ask questions. But for our youth key team, our leaders out there, they're hearing this and like obviously for the most part, they're very keen to get their first house, get into the market. You touched on it for a second there. They are hearing things on TV, media, like news reports saying, "Oh, it's impossible to buy in Sydney." And even you said you touched on, you started in Brisbane. Do you want to give thoughts to, like, is it impossible to buy in Sydney? Is that like a pipe dream, or?
If you're looking at Bondi, it is. So I think, I had a meeting with a client the other day, and they had a budget of 3.5, and that was just a semi. So that's
Wow.
But look, it's not impossible. I think from my experience, there are properties where they're still within the 550 mark, and that's still a house. You just need to know where to look and who to speak to. And I think that's one of the things is when you kind of geographically kind of position your area and you don't know the other suburbs, you kind of think there is no other options. But, working in my field, I'm typically all around Sydney, all around Wollongong, so I know where the prices are, and, based on what you're looking to achieve, hey, can you still buy something at 650? Yeah, you can still do that today. Very much, just did that recently, and I had one offered to me in Campbelltown where I had a granny flat already attached to it for 650, and I rented that for 600 per week.
Wow.
So and so it is, and that's like
My God.
We'll talk after.
But those opportunities, right? Like I literally got the call. And the agent was like, it's off market, I need to know now. If not, I'm going to sell it to another buyer. It's like that, those transactions. So those opportunities don't sit on the market. They literally come through your network and they go out straight away because it's a good deal. But it is still achievable. You just need to know where to look, and you really need to know how to ask the right questions ultimately.
Now I've got thousands of questions flowing in. Jump in if you have a question.
You mentioned before how obviously with the market in today, it's not, you can't just buy, the properties aren't worth 150, 300,000, 200,000 these days. What are some steps now as a 20-year-old or 22-year-old that you can put in place? Because I think one thing that I really had to get over was the thought of actually owning a home. That was not attainable in my mind for years and years and years and years and years. It wasn't probably till 3 years ago where I actually was like, oh, I actually can. But once you get to that stage where you can realize, what are some things that you do then? When you've decided, okay, this is what I want to do. To get to owning your own home, or even building a deposit. How does that look? All that kind of stuff.
And that would definitely go back to Dan straight away, because budgeting would be the biggest thing to make sure you understand your finances and how much you can actually spend, or actually how much you can put away to servicing your loan. So you'd need to kind of sit down firstly to understand what that looks like from a cash flow perspective, because ultimately when you're buying property, you still want to make sure you have a buffer in place for any unforeseen, circumstances before you actually go, hey, let's start looking for the property. But what I've learned is that when you are looking for property, you need to have the right team around you, and that is critical. Because they will be able to guide you. That's probably your first point of contact, is to have, when you're buying property, you need a solicitor firstly to vet the contract. So you want to have someone there on your back end just to help you from a legal point of view.
And that would be just because sometimes you hear the lingo around that. Would that be a conveyancer?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And they'll kind of can give you some support and guidance. So, if you're looking through a property and you have the contract, obviously you'd be like, what's this, right? But that's what you send it to a conveyancer, and they can tell you the ins and outs of the property. Is there a drainage or a sewer running through your property, which could quickly devalue your property straight away? Because say for instance, a pipe bursts, that's literally Sydney Water's coming and digging up your house, right? So that's the stuff that they look at, which you probably won't know straight off looking at the property. But the other step would be, you need to have a broker or a lender, because ultimately you need to know how much you can spend or how much you can borrow. So once you've done those stages, then it's, okay, well, if you've got an accountant, good to speak to your accountant, because they will understand your tax position. And they'll understand how much you can spend. If it's an investment, what you should be looking out for. Is negative gearing going to work in your favour? Do you look for something a bit more newer because you're going to get a better depreciation? So it's good to have that team which supports you, but also has your goal in mind. And once everyone's working for that same purpose, the same goal, then you can leverage off them. And that's the biggest thing, because getting into property sounds, very, very complicated and very hard, because you just don't know who to reach out to. But once you have the right professionals surrounding you, it's like, hey, I need this. Hey, make a call, right? And what I do, my role is more to orchestrate all that together. So typically a client will come to me and I go, hey, look, I can connect you with X, Y, Z if you haven't got them, and I'll do all that running around in the back end. So I'll speak to your conveyancer, I'll speak to your broker, I'll speak to your accountant to find out whose name it needs to go in, and that way your role is more just to look for the property and enjoy what you're buying. And I'm doing all the back end stuff, which makes this so much more simplistic but enjoyable.
Listen, personal question now, this might help viewers, it might not. Your company name is?
Stride Property Coaching.
Write that down. Stride Property Coaching. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. I know, particularly in my team and wildlife, I'm just thinking hills right now. There's a lot of people in there. They've gone to the banks to see how much they can borrow, but they're coming back and they're saying things like, I can't believe that the bank will give me this much money.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak? Is it dangerous?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah, they're like, you can have this. I'm like, did you see how much?
Literally.
Yeah. Do you want to speak into that? Like,
Yeah. Look, the banks are going to obviously work off their calculator as whether you want to spend that amount or not. They're going to allow you, they're going to do the calculation. Go, hey, look, you can borrow X amount of dollars. Will it be $1 million, $2 million, based on your servicing? Because ultimately, maybe like
100,000, 200,000.
But look, if you think about the lending industry, they get paid by how much you borrow. So typically, the more you can borrow, the more they're going to get back in terms of interest or their upfronts. So that's why typically they'll say, well, based on your maximum capacity, you can borrow, that amount of dollars. Whether you choose to spend that, that's your decision. I always say the most important thing, and it's funny because everyone comes to me and they go, oh, you don't want to do this. And so I go, look, firstly, before you buy any property, 2 things you need to consider is firstly your lifestyle goals and your financial goals. And if that all lines up, then you buy the property. Like, don't just buy it because your neighbour's buying it and just told you over a barbecue that I've just bought this investment and it's doing so well, I've made X amount of dollars and you need to get on this bandwagon. His financial situation could be much, much different to yours or lifestyle wise. Yeah. So I typically sit down with the client and said, look, I need to understand those goals before you even do anything and then reassess, what you've been able to borrow and then work on that comfort level. And when you're comfortable with those figures, that's what you buy accordingly. So even if the banks say, you can spend up to 700,000, you might only feel comfortable spending 500 based on those repayments. Yeah. That's what you work with. Yeah.
So good. Purdy, I might be quoting this wrong, but I have heard you say it once or twice. When you're making a budget, it's not just numbers, it's like behavioural.
Yeah, I mean, look, budgeting in essence is pretty easy.
Yeah.
You've got money coming in, you've got money going out. You want to make sure you're not in deficit. You want to make sure there's, there's not more money going out than what is coming in. And I think, like a couple of things that you said there, which I think sort of caught my attention in relation to budgeting and I guess just cash flow, is sometimes you see people and they've got a desire to have this huge, McMansion in a certain part of town, and that's all great, but does it align to why you're doing this? And sometimes you've got to drill down and ask questions. I love that what you're talking about, it comes back to your goals and your values. And I've met people along the way over the years that they want to have this big house for their family, but the reality is they've got to work night and day, 7 days a week to service the mortgage, and it just means they're stressed. Maybe the husband and wife are working, they're just not getting the time with their kids, they're not building memories. And I think just to put it all in a little bit of perspective from my end, it's like definitely have those goals, those dreams, but remember why you're doing it. I think it's important to your kids aren't going to remember how big your house was, but the kids are going to remember the memories you made in a home. And I think sometimes it's really important to establish that at the start. If we can identify what our values are, but like if I could even just speak personally, like we got in the property market. I was fortunate enough, I did a trade out of high school, so saved money and got a pretty good job off the back of my trade, and I was able to enter the property market also in my early 20s, which was awesome. But like, I even remember when I did that, it was like, all right, help me get on the front foot. I was able to, as a single guy, I was able to get other single guys in renting rooms off me, and
smart man.
So it was a good way to do it back then. Anyway, back then it was a lot cheaper, but interest rates were a lot higher too. So I got this house in my early 20s, but a huge value of mine has always been to create a place of home for other people. So it hasn't just been it's always been something I've desired to do. So even now with my wife, we've on our second property, and we built a house that we could entertain in, we could, show hospitality from, and, all that type of stuff. So I think you've got to bring it back to what's important to you.
100%.
Something that I even think of people in your situation, like I love what you were saying before, Felix, like someone that is because even young people, like I speak to some young people in their teens, and they sort of have this passion to one day either buy their first investment property, buy their first home that they want to maybe live in with their family. Like practically, what could someone, even in their teens, mid to late teens or early 20s, what could they be doing years out? Like for some of these guys, they might be in high school or just out of high school, and they're like, all right, in my early 20s, I want to do this. What could they be doing now to get on that road to move towards buying property?
Yeah, I think having like-minded friends or people who are on the same page, because it's tough to do it on your own. But if you can come together and maybe do, a joint agreement where you buy the property together and you put funds together as a deposit, that's one thing you could start to talk about. But also savings is a big thing, because ultimately when you're investing, you don't have to own it outright by yourself. You can have a few people to come together, and you can easily draw that up in a contract in terms of who owns what share and what they've put through. But you're all going to benefit together once that property grows, and you can leverage off that investment later on. So, I think as a young person growing up, that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is think, how do I do this by myself? But you really don't have to do it by yourself. There's a lot of people out there who are thinking the same thing, and you just got to come together.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I think, start saving, and that's probably, how much can you put aside towards that deposit? A lot of banks nowadays, you need at least 20%, so it could, amount to quite a fair bit of dollars when you add stamp duty and all that. But if it's spread over like 4 people, it's more achievable.
That's really good. I think when we were chatting earlier as well, you were talking about like the value of building relationships, and especially building relationships with real estate agents. Because I think as well, like we were talking about this just before you arrived, like Eddie and Nancy are going to open homes at the moment, and you see maybe 30 other couples there, and they pull up in their Mercedes, and you sort of rock up, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, like
Park around the corner.
Parking down the road and walking in confidently, but it can seems so easy to feel overwhelmed in that type of environment. And I think for a lot of people, that's probably how they start. You jump on realestate.com, you look, you see an open home in an area you'd like to buy in, you rock up, you sort of maybe leave your details with the agent, you leave, and you just sort of keep an eye on it. But what could you do beyond that?
Yeah, like I've always come from a proactive approach. So even before I go to an open or, meet an agent, I always do a lot of back end stuff. So, a lot of due diligence into property. There's a lot of like free forums where you can just jump on to see, the property data when it's sold and stuff. But I think one of the important things is actually just reaching out to the agent beforehand. So I used to work with a lot of clients where they would just email inquiry forms, right? And if you think about how many inquiries an agent gets a day, you just, a name on that email. But when you actually make a call and put a name to it and a voice, that kind of resonates in them, and then they kind of go, okay, well, hey, I may have spoken to Nancy.
Wow.
And then that already allows for one touch point. The next one, when you go through the open, then you put your name at the door, like, oh, it's Nancy. They go, oh yeah, we spoke. So then they start to know you from, opposed to all those other buyers that, you're seeing, which could be quite intimidating. And if they say, oh yeah, hey Nancy, and they start calling you by your first name, the rest of the crowd goes, oh wow, like he knows her. She's got some form of advantage, and it's all about building that rapport relationship with an agent. Like I get a lot of good, deals and good opportunities because I don't see an agent for an agent. I see them as a human being, as a friend. And I think that's the thing a lot of people forget, is that real estate agents aren't out there to rip us off or do the wrong thing. They're just acting for their vendor. But as a human being, they're just doing a job, and you want to build a relationship with them.
That's correct.
And that's the thing. Like a lot of people have that misconception that oh, they're going to rip me off, and I can't talk to them. But there's certain ways in which you can have a real estate agent actually work with you for that whole process. So you don't need to engage like a buyer's agent like myself. You can actually still use a real estate agent who's going to work for your best interests as well. And it's all about building that relationship and that rapport. So, even when I first started, I used to buy them coffee. Like, I'd just go, oh yeah, what are you drinking? Like what you did, Dan, right? And I'll rock up to the open, oh hey guys, here's a coffee for you. And they'll be blown away because no one's doing that, right? But that's another level you've now established in that relationship, which no one else does. And it'll just set you apart. And and then you'll be front of mind. And so when they're doing their callbacks, they're like, oh yeah, I remember Nancy, she called. And once they have that conversation, they realize, so the biggest thing about getting yourself on this thing they call the hot buyers list, right? And every real estate agent has it. It's your name on a board. Okay, so if any property comes up, you're the first to go. Now, to get on that board, you have to show that you're keen, you're ready to go, you've got your finances ready. So it's that conversation where you have with an agent like, hey, look, I've already got my finances pre-approved. We've been looking, we know the market, we know what we're looking for, we're ready to go. As soon as something comes up, we'll transact. Once you have those conversations, your name gets on that board. So you're getting opportunities where no one else is getting. And that's the key that no one tells you, but they've got those boards, right?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely all about building that relationship. It's just like anything in general, right, guys? Like, you know, people want to do business with people they know, their friends, as opposed to a stranger.
Yeah. So good.
That's amazing.
I feel like so many just tricks to get in the head.
Yeah.
All right, Felix, you've been doing this for a while. What are some other tricks that you could give to like young youth leaders? Because to be honest, you said before, like we grew up in this like 20k vicinity.
Yeah.
And so you naturally just look where you've grown up or where you'd like to live. For people who here a lot are looking to buy, what tricks would you say, oh, you should be looking for this or for this? Or you were telling us a story before about a house with a granny flat, which I wish I bought off you, by the way. But like, what are some tricks that you would say to your clients?
Look, I think like in this particular market, you have to be on the front foot. So the trick is you need to be in that agent's ear. I'm literally texting and calling agents every single day, so that I'm always front of mind. And that is literally what you need to be. So every agent that gets an inquiry, it gets logged, right? And then they will mark you from cold, warm to hot. And the hot guys are the guys they keep on their radar. They've all got algorithms and systems that they do that. So as a trick, the more you call them, the more you have that interaction, the more they're gonna remember you. And that's when you're gonna get different opportunities to what a standard buyer who will get looking on real estate and domain. The other trick is you wanna be able to be very clear with what you're looking for. So there's no point being vague and saying, oh yeah, I don't know, I just want a 3-bedroom and maybe one bathroom. Like, be very specific, because they don't have time. The more detail you can give them, the more they're able to help you with your brief. Because they're like, hey Nancy, I've actually got a 3-bedroom, 600 square meters, quiet street. It's exactly what you're looking for, right? As opposed to, I just got a 3-bedroom. Do you want to have a look at it? And then you go, it's on a busy road. So the more detailed you can be, the more the agents can actually help you in that process.
That's awesome.
So I'll definitely do that. And then I think one of the things people are very conscious about is, their budget, right? So an agent might say, well, what's your budget? And they're kind of like, I don't want to give you my, what I could have,
I'm like, I don't want to tell you.
I'm like, do I play poker right now? So what's your budget? It's like 700,000, you're like 1.5. Or if it's 700, I'm more like 300. And you're
and look, it's not that they're trying to find out, what you're going to pay for this place or how much you can spend or what your finance is. They're just trying to find out, is there a fit for that property and you? Because ultimately, if you walk through a property and your budget's 800 and they're guiding 1.1, well, ultimately, there's no point kind of pursuing that property. So they really want to get an idea of how much that property is going to be suitable for you. I typically, would say, because obviously my space, I can go, look, I've got clients ranging from here to here, and if the property is right, we're willing to pay X amount. But, for someone who's might have a borrowing capacity of 800, you might say, oh, look, my borrowing capacity, I could probably look for something around 700. So I wouldn't give them your absolute max, because, then they'll know, and like if it push comes to shove and you're in the tunnel and your negotiations, at least you have, you've got a bit more room to move with. But I guess I've got the luxury where I can kind of vary my figures around a bit more. But there's no harm in giving them a figure. And they might even ask you the question after an open, like, what do you think the property's worth? And they always do that, right? Because
always. Did you like it? Yeah. What do you think it's worth?
Did you see yourself living in here?
Yeah.
That's the one.
I'm like, can my budget see myself living here?
So you can always you can use what's sold in the area. So that's a really good one. So if you're well in tune with the market, and that's where it comes back to your due diligence, you can say, well, hey, look, down the road sold for 650, a similar size box. So that's probably what I'm thinking for this property. So when you do that, it's more of an educated answer, as opposed to, oh yeah, I like the kitchen, I reckon I'll pay this amount for it. So that's where the key is. When you kind of start having those conversations, the agents respect you on a different level because they know you've been doing your homework.
Yeah, and they're taking you seriously.
Correct. Yeah.
How do you find out like all this information? Like, is there like a website or something, like just to find out? Even when you're talking about like specific areas, like good areas to buy in, or like up and coming areas. Where do you find that? Like, how do you find that information?
Yeah. No, it's funny. I was reading this post and some guy wrote like, if we only knew where all these rezoning places were going to happen, we would have bought there ages ago. You know, what does the government tell us? I go, they do. You just don't know where to look, right? And you know, it all comes. It's all out there. It's all disclosed. State planning, right? That's where it all starts from. Because if you think about the hills, right, they already announced that the metro is going to go through and those planning proposals for it. Whether it gets approved straight away or not, that's already indication what they've earmarked for it. Similar to Badgerys Creek, like we were buying out Southwest and Western Sydney, St. Mary's like 7 years ago when price was only $350 for clients, knowing that St. Mary's was going to be the main station leading down. And so all that information is already there. And the draft plans and council website, it's all there. You just need to spend time looking through it. I guess the unfortunate thing is most people work, right? They don't have the luxury to sort through all that. Like that's what I'm sitting there reading through all the DCPs, LEPs, and looking at all the draft plans and what's being marked, and then straight away like, okay, that's going to have, you know, a rezoning change. So if you buy anything with 400, it's going to be 400 metres of the station, it's going to be zone R4, which is high rise. So, you know it's going to be worth so much more later on. And you know, you can kind of pick that up quite quickly when you start reading through these documents, but it is out there, but you just need to be actively looking, and just be one step ahead of, you know, your mums and dads, which only do it on the weekend. So I think, you know, when the news starts highlighting it, that's when you're kind of passive investors then jump on that bandwagon, and that's typically a bit later than where you want to be. You kind of want to be at the start and kind of pick all that up before it gets through the news, and that's when you're not having that mad rush and you're not competing with, you know, 100 different buyers.
Is it possible to do that? Like, again, I'm thinking of 20-year-old youth leader, they're studying, they don't have a family yet, they've got a bit of time and they're really keen. Like, is it possible just to jump in and just learn at your own pace? Or obviously you can engage a pro, which I think is a really good move for people, like reach out to someone in the game like yourself. But is it possible as well just to jump in and through different resources, local council websites and stuff, just start to do some research and just put in a bit of the hard work?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm all for that. Like a lot of my clients, I go, look, if you're in for the work, like you don't need to engage me, just do that and you should be on the right track. So, you know, the New South Wales planning portal is usually the best start if you're looking to buy in New South Wales, and all the other states would have a very similar planning portal, and you can see all the major projects they've already earmarked and how much they're spending there. And that will already tell you, like, I mean, typically the traits of where areas do grow a lot in value is where there's good population growth, good infrastructure and amenities, and good education and employment. So if you kind of follow those parameters, you almost can't go wrong. So if you start with that, that's a really, really good kind of blueprint to work with. And
as a rule of thumb, and look, I know this would probably depend on a number of factors, but someone looking to buy in a major city, or actually I should say someone looking to live in a major city that wants to get in the market, are they best to look at doing what you did? Maybe, you know, sometimes I'll call it rent vesting, or like buy an investment property and rent where you want to live. Have you got thoughts around that?
Look, I think it's like what it goes back to, you know, looking at your lifestyle and your finances, because the last thing you're going to do is buy into the area that you really want, but then your finances are so stretched that you're just eating baked beans and toast every day, right? You don't want to be in that position where you can't enjoy life, you can't enjoy living. So I'm all for rent investing. Like, I mean, if, you know, that's going to get you in the market and get you in a better position, absolutely. I had clients where they were living in Seaforth and, you know, they go, oh, look, we can't afford buying here. So what do we do next? And I said, look, you know, ultimately you've got $650 to spend. Why don't we look at an investment to start with? And that way you haven't changed your lifestyle. You're still living where you want to live. You're still close to all your amenities, and, you know, this investment's still going to work for you in the back end. And, you know, I think they held the investment for 3 years. We just sold it from, and they made about probably $250, right? And they've used that deposit now to buy something with what they've saved in that area now. You know, and that's the thing, like, I think when you're trying to get into something where it doesn't work for you in terms of like your finances, it's better to look at various options as well. I'm all for rent investing. I think, you know, it's kind of, we're in a stage now where property prices have gone so high, it's an option which is actually more viable and more suitable. Yeah, could probably go on back, Drew, to what you kind of mentioned with like people looking at investing, and the funny thing is, like, I get investors come to me and I go, what's your goal? And they always go, we want to buy like 10 properties. I'm like, okay, where'd you get that number from? And they go, I don't know, just, isn't that what everyone does?
Yeah, just sounds good.
Yeah, everyone's like,
10's heaps better than 9.
Yeah. And I think the way it's been perceived is that, you buy your 10, let it grow, sell 5, and then that pays off the other 5, which is great, but that's a long time to get to that point. And I said, if I could show you a way where you could do pretty much essentially that from a return point of view, but on 3 properties, do you see that as being more achievable? And they go, enlighten me, and really it's so simple, and like anyone can do it. So all you literally need to do is buy properties where you can put another dwelling on it. And New South Wales, granny flat, all you need is a 450 size block.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at numbers specifically, say for instance the front house rents for say 450, 3-bedroom house, and the back's 350, that's essentially $800.
Yeah.
You did that 3 times over, that's 2,400. If you minus 20%, say for your property expenses, that's 2,000, right? Now, if they all get paid off, that's $100,000 of passive income every year, which it's more attainable than trying to go 10, sell off half, pay your capital gains tax and all your stamp duty and everything. When you're doing this strategy, you're paying the one council rate for the both properties. You're not paying, double the amount of stamp duty because you're only selling on one property, but now you're having more valuable properties than volume, and it's all about having quality over quantity. I think people don't realize that. They kind of think, oh yeah, I'm great, I'm doing well, I've got 20 properties and stuff like that, but you could have 20 properties out in the regional areas, and some guy might have 2 in really good blue chip areas, and they're actually performing a lot better.
Yeah, wow.
So, and I kind of learned that. I learned that pretty quick too, because I was on that the kind of accumulation phase. Oh yeah, I'm going to buy this, buy that, and I bought quite a fair bit, and then I was like, okay, some are good and some aren't doing that well, and then you quickly realize, okay, well, the ones that are doing well are the ones that actually have a good land component to it, and the ones that have just kind of only gone up passively were more your townhouses and your apartments and stuff.
Wow.
And so then you realize, okay, well, it's really about holding better, quality properties. Like I had 2 Christmas ago, I had like 4 properties right on the day before Christmas where the hot water tanks went, like on 4 of them, right? And I get this call, and like, I'm like, this can't be happening, right? Yeah. And it's like 10 grand, like for all 4, and I'm like, oh man, that's a big expense. And you kind of don't want those headaches, right? So that's why I'm like, yeah, if you have less, but they're better properties where you generate the cash flow that you need for your goals, you're going to be in a much better position. Like 3 is so much better, where it's literally 6 streams of income.
Yeah.
It's more achievable, right?
Yeah.
Like, granny flats only cost you maybe 150 to 170, as opposed to trying to save another deposit for another house and stamp duty and all that comes with it. So typically when an investor comes to me and they say 10, I go, this is a much straightforward, streamlined process, which I think would be more suitable, more, less risk, but you're still achieving the same result.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
From here, I go to New South Wales planning portal.
You're buying coffees for researching the
I'm like, so we're friends now. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, 20K off the house. Okay, maybe changing gears a little bit, because you work with a lot of young couples, you help them get their first home and whatnot. Is there things that you've noticed that have like deterred them or been the reason they couldn't get a home, like habits, spending patterns, or things they did wrong that I guess?
I think the biggest challenge for people like newer couples or homeowners is the uncertainty, because it's the first time doing it, and is literally your biggest asset, right? And so there's
oh my god,
there is that fear factor. Like, am I making the right decision? Have I made the right choice? If I buy here, that's our savings. And is it going to go up, or have we lost money? And the biggest thing I think a lot of people fear as a first home buyer or any buyer is, are we overpaying? And ultimately, you don't want to overpay for a property, because then you'll be going backwards.
Right.
Or you're worse, so like you pay for it and then the banks go, mate, your property is like 50 grand less than what you paid for it, and then you've got to come up with the 50,000. So the biggest thing is actually doing your homework. And that's why I'm such a big believer about doing that diligence and going around to as many auctions and open homes and understanding your market, but also making a log of it. It's just like, if you're trying to, increase your physical state when going to the gym, it's very important that you keep track of your process, your progress, so am I improving? Where am I going short? It's very much like property, right? You go through an open home, you write down, what it's been listed for, what it sells for, who was the agent. There's a lot of things that you see online which you can't get when you walk through a property. And one thing being like smell, dampness, stuff like that, right? Yeah, and they're the things that you want to actually highlight and keep a tab off. But once you do all that due diligence, you have a better idea of the market. And so when the right opportunity comes up, you have more confidence, as opposed of someone who's never done it before and going, oh, I don't know, the agents tell me I should pay this. Is it actually worth that amount? And then you don't know who to call to. Yeah. And the agent's like, well, if you don't tell me today, you're going to lose it. And then you feel pressured, right? But
this is true.
The pressure is real.
And you're like, I'll fill the 20 grand myself. I'll fill the gap.
But if you have like that due diligence shit and you confidently are aware of where their market is, you can say, hey, look, I'm happy to pay this amount. So I know that that's what it's worth.
Yeah.
To give you an example, when I started like really getting into investing in property, I was looking at on average 100 properties a month just to get my knowledge up to scratch in that area.
That's physically going to the property.
Yeah. So every weekend, like I'll do probably 10 to 15.
Wow.
And then after hours, after work, I'll do maybe 5 like private inspections. And I just remember my wife, she had the run sheet and she'd drop me off. I'll run in, do everything, write all the notes, go out. My son was in the back and he was probably only 6 months and we just did that week in, week out, right?
Wow.
But if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have known the market that well. And sometimes it's a lot of work, but you could pace that out over a longer duration. But for me, I was like, I want to get this done like in a month. I want to be able to like know this market and start buying straight away. So, but like in what I share with the course, like you don't have to physically do that to start with. You could still use tools like realestate.com and domain and just jump on the sold page and start going through that to start with and, writing it down. Okay, what does it look like on the pictures? What are the descriptions? And just making a tab there to start with to kind of build your knowledge. And then when you start doing the open homes, you can add to that list.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So good.
You mentioned a moment ago the course,
say.
I thought I'd mention, Felix actually has an awesome course that we're going to be. Well, we're putting it together so people in our church can access it. Yeah. So it's a great blueprint to getting into a home, and not just for couples but also for singles. And love what you mentioned right at the outset about possibly looking at collaborating with other people that have similar passions. Like there's different ways to do it. So that's something. Definitely stay tuned. We'll keep you posted on that because I think that's going to be a huge help to a lot of people. See this as maybe just a bit of a teaser, a bit of a trailer for what's to come. So.
That's huge. This is the first time in church we've had, I guess, from an at-large perspective, someone like Felix come and be like, all right, I want to help people in general get their first home, which is so helpful.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask a couple of things you had mentioned along the way that might just clarify it for people. Yeah. Some people might like the idea of it, just like you'd mentioned things like stamp duty and capital gains tax. Yep. Could you maybe just explain some of the costs? Like I'm even thinking agents' fees, like obviously this is the cost of buying a home. Yep. That's the obvious cost. What other costs are involved when it comes to purchasing?
And that's a really good point you mentioned because a lot of people just think about that 20% deposit or 10%, and they don't think about all those all those other external costs that come with it. So stamp duty on average is probably about 4% in New South Wales.
And what is stamp duty, just for people's benefit?
Yeah, so that's obviously a tax that we pay to the government when we are purchasing. It's like as a duty when you're purchasing a property, the government obviously wants to have their so you've got to pay that duty, and that goes directly to the government. Your solicitor will work at that cost when you're actually at that process of actually acquisition. So you don't need to go and figure that out yourself. Right. But if you do want to get an idea in terms of what it looks like, say for instance, your budget is $650, you can jump on to any website and just type in New South Wales stamp duty, and then you can put in your purchase price, whether you're an investor, first home buyer, what exemptions you might have, and it will spit out a figure. So at least you know what type of number you need to work with.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
The other cost is your conveyancing costs, which can range anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000. So if you budget for that, and also reports. So your building pests, your strata. So building pests could be anywhere between $400 to $500. Strata is about probably $200 to $300. So they're the upfront costs that you would need to have ready when you're buying a property, because the last thing you want to do is buy a property without doing a report, right? You want to know what you're buying, and you know, a very small expense to pay if you're outlaying, you know, $1 million for a property, and if it's costing you $500 to actually understand what you're actually buying. So it just blows my mind when people skip on those reports, and you know, you're spending a lot of money on, or you're borrowing property for a 30-year investment, and you don't take the time to actually do a report to know what you're buying. So but yeah, they're typically the cost that you will incur. I mean, with the agents, they would get paid by their vendors, so you won't necessarily have to pay for the agent's commission in that sense, because they get remunerated by the vendors who are selling the property.
No, it's really handy to know. And a term, an acronym I hear get thrown around a bit is LMI. Do you want to explain what LMI is and how it might impact us looking to buy property?
Yeah, so with the banks, they have LMI, which is called lender's mortgage insurance. So if you're borrowing more than 80%, the banks need to have some level of insurance to...
That's 80% the value of the property.
Correct.
So,
yeah. So if you're coming to the bank and you have 20% of the deposit for the value of the property, then you won't have to pay LMI, which is lender's mortgage insurance. But if you're borrowing more than 80%, so you're borrowing, say, 90%, they need to safeguard themselves to make sure that you are, you know, a candidate that can still make those repayments. So there is that insurance component which you have to pay. It's only once off, but it trying to guarantees that if you were to default or something, they have some recourse for that. There's a third party that will kind of support you in that regards. But if you can buy without having to go through that, it's more preferred. Because that would be another cost that you would have to think about.
That would be on top of your stamp duty. And
correct. That's extra. Sometimes the banks will factor the LMI into the lending as well, so you can borrow that into your cost. So you may not have to come up with that yourself. Just when you speak to the lender or the mortgage broker, if you want to actually include the LMI, you can speak to them around that, and they can kind of try to package that all in for you.
Hey, good to know. I remember when I bought my first house a long time ago, I thought I had the budget because we saved up, and back then they had this deal. It's like you need 10%.
Yeah.
And so we got our 65,000, which took me via like 2.5 years, and we're like, okay, cool, we're good to go. And then like, oh well, then now we had to get lender's mortgage, because once we had the stamp duty, it put us back under. And so I'm like, wait a second. I don't just need 10%. And so I felt like coming in new to the market, I was like, oh my gosh, is there more fees and hidden things? And then when we sold, actually, there's so many things as well. You have to hire furniture. And then
removalists, just all the practical things.
Like
that's
20
right.
cages. Like
I think, you mentioned with stamp duty. So, you know, if you are selling your investment property, not stamp duty, capital gains tax. So if you are selling your investment property, and you've made profit on it, there is a capital gains tax which you have to pay. And if you held it less than 12 months, the full amount that you've made is assessed to your assessable income. But if you held it for more than 12 months, then only 50% is assessed. And that only applies to investment properties. If it's your prime residence, you don't have that. But it's one thing to note if you are buying for the sake of just buying and then flipping it or something, because a lot of people might do a cosmetic renovation, and they might think, okay, we'll flip it after 4 months or whatever. You will be assessed on the full amount. So, but like in this market today, like I've seen, like I give you a very clear example. This is in, do you know, it's near Mount Druitt. It's Daruk or?
Oh, Daruk.
Daruk. Yeah. So there was a property that I was looking at, and it had been purchased for $410,000 in December last year. Like long grass up to your knees, needed full fit out. It just recently sold for $700,000.
Wow.
And it was just, all they did was a cosmetic renovation to it. It was crazy because I was looking at it, I go, oh, this looks really nicely done. And I was like, oh yeah, I could get good rental for my client on this. And then when I looked up the data to see when it sold, I was like, oh my goodness, they paid $410,000 for it.
Wow.
And they probably at most spent $80,000 redoing the place, right? But look at what they've made.
That's incredible.
So stuff like that is still attainable if you know which areas and if you can get yourself, because properties like that, everyone looks at it and go, oh, that's way too much work. Like if you looked at it, you'd be like, oh no, that's too much for me. But if you can look beyond that and see the potential, and the trick is when you are doing cosmetics, you need to look for disparity. So what you need to look out for, okay, what's unrenovated, what's that selling for, and what's fully renovated selling for. If there's enough room in between, to factor in your costs and a margin and all the other costs we spoke about, then that's a project you'll look at.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
So that's like I would say that's the blueprint in terms of what you need to work with when you're looking at cosmetic renovations.
Yeah, so good. Okay, I keep saying we're going to finish, but we've got more questions. Okay, I was having a conversation the other day. Her son's my age, and he's like, I feel like the only way he can get in is if he buys land and builds, or buys a house and land package.
Yeah.
Because then there's less fees involved and whatnot. What's your advice in terms of, do you buy a house that's already freestanding, or do you go down the build or house and land package? Do you have a preference for young people?
I like personally like to be able to walk through a property and get a really good feel of what I'm buying, because when you're buying something on paper, you're really just going off their word for it. So if it is a house and land package, I would say go through all the projects they've done.
Yeah.
Obviously major builders, you can see the workmanship and you've got that more kind of comfort that, you know what you're expecting to get. But really, you'd probably get a bit cheaper for a house and land package because you're paying for something that's built later on, and something that's already completed you would pay a premium for because it's complete and ready today. Yeah. So if you are someone who, your budget doesn't allow for something right now, there's nothing wrong with the house and land packages, but you just need to make sure the credibility of the actual developer or builder is, up to scratch. So that you need to do your homework beforehand. And it's very much buying off the plan in apartments. You don't just buy it because, the sales agent's saying you're getting a great deal. You need to look at their past history, what they've built, actually speak to people who've bought in their projects before. Have there been maintenance issues? Have there been works which they've never adhered to or stuff like that? Because ultimately, once you buy it, you paid your money, and if they're not fixing up the repairs, then you're left to deal with that. So I think it's more apparent now than it was before, especially with the high rises, with all the structural issues, and a lot of people now are doing more due diligence and looking at their past projects. How reputable are these builders? Have they built apartments in the past, or this is their first one? So very much, even if you're doing just a standard house, I'd be doing the same as well.
Yeah, that's where my brother's at. He's like, if I buy down the road, it's like 80k more. Why don't I just do this house and land package? I'm like, I don't know, man. Watch this.
Well, I think as well, you will find developers will tend to, buying it. You might, buying something off your local agent down the road. Might be a mum and dad couple selling their house, but when house and land packages by developers, they're looking to turn product a bit quicker. Maybe narrower margins. They've entered the market, for that land. Quite affordably. So I think they're looking for cash flow, they're looking for turnover. So I think sometimes there might be opportunities to buy in, at a lower price, but I think you've got to do the due diligence. I would say.
And there's nothing wrong with I think one of the things now is a lot of developers, they're buying like a whole estate and they're already packaging it together, so you can't really just buy a block of land and then go look for your own kind of house design. And then they're capturing on that front where you don't have that option anymore, and that's a bit tricky because you don't have too much of a say in terms of what that end product will look like. So if you are buying, looking for land, if you can get ones where you have that own discretion where you can pick the build and stuff, that would be more preferred.
I agree.
I think one other comment I'd make is we're talking about, I guess, the cash flow, personal cash flow and planning and savings going into it. I've heard it said, maybe a good rule of thumb is often when it comes to budgets, people are asking about percentages, like what to spend where. And I think as a rule of thumb, your cost for either rent or mortgage payments, basically your cost for your accommodation, living expense should be 30% or lower, ideally lower, but I think over 30% you start to be stretching, and sometimes you've got to adjust slightly and just realise what that is. But it's a really good rule of thumb. I think that advice is pretty broadly accepted, that if you can keep that cost of your house, home, whether it's rent or mortgage, at 30% or under, it's a really, really good target to have anyway, for what it's worth.
Awesome. No, that's good.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because that will allow you to obviously allow for provisions in other areas, you know, and you won't feel like you're stretched. You won't feel like, you know, the mortgage is chewing up 80% of your income, which a lot of people do feel that, because they've bought in areas where they actually can't service. So using that principle of 30%, you can then have the other 70%. You can still build assets and still feel comfortable. So
No, I think we've covered some really good ground here. Nancy, you feeling set up, ready to hit some open homes this weekend?
I mostly listen.
Planning Portal New South Wales.
Oh, 100%. Buy the agent's copy.
If you're buying off the plan, make sure you look them up, okay? McDonald Jones is good.
But I think, you know, one of the key things that a lot of people do is you just need to ask the right key questions. So when you are going through an open home, you know, you need to establish why you're asking those questions to an agent or whatever you're trying to find out. And to just give some really good tips and some key questions that I ask. So one of the things that I always ask is, why in particular is that vendor looking to sell? And I may not ask it that specific way. I might go in and go, oh, this is a beautiful house. Why would they be looking to sell something like this? Just kind of have it more flowing. But the reason behind that question is to try and understand the urgency of the sale from the vendor. And you know, that makes as well of one of changes.
100%. Because that's what I think that's what we're trying to figure out, is how do you deal with the pressure of constantly getting calls of like, quick, make an offer now, otherwise it goes. Literally is what we're dealing with. I'm just kind of like, how do you kind of keep that at bay, but still make informed decisions and not feel pressured to pounce? And,
So like what I mentioned before, you'd want to have your ducks lined up beforehand. So before I go through a property, I would have done a fair bit of research on the property as well. So I know where it's positioned. If they're guiding a price, I'll know whether that is within the price, what's sold for. That way, or when I'm inspecting the property, I'm really just there to visually make sure everything's right with it, not so much to look at it and then go back home and do my homework. And that's the difference between being able to transact straight away or waiting a week later because you're not in a position because you haven't done your due diligence. So if you are looking, I would say if you have that time, try to get, you know, your head around, you know, what's a fair value for the price beforehand, what are things selling for. You know, if you have time, you might want to ask the agent to send you a copy of the contract beforehand. You may not have to get it vetted straight away because it does cost money when a solicitor looks over it, but at least you've got it on hand and you're not waiting for them to send it through. So if you do like it, you can send it to your conveyancer straight away, or give them the heads up, like, I'm looking at this property this weekend, I've got the contract, if we like it, can we send it to you straight away?
That's awesome.
That way you've got that confidence around, hey, the legal's done, finance is done, we know what we're going to pay for it, and really all we're doing is just making sure that house is what we need. And then when the agent makes that call, you'll be in a better position to make an offer.
So that's what you were saying, like looking at realestate.com and like looking at the land size and stuff like that, and what properties are sold near.
And just kind of doing a bit of homework beforehand, just so you get a better feel of the market. But look, most of what I do, you know, I typically make offers right off the back of an inspection. Like, and that's, you know, and so when you're getting those calls, it's like someone's already made an offer, you're like, that was quick. You know, and that's because if you're in a position where you know where prices are at, you feel more comfortable. Like, I can give you a personal example that I had last week. It was in Campbelltown, and it was literally 2 k's away from the station, and they had a guide of 650 to 680. And I knew that it was 3-bedroom house, brick, you know, 600 square meters. I knew that was worth $720 every day of the week, just because I just know that market, right? And I told my client, guys, if you don't buy this today on a Thursday, I can guarantee you when it goes to an open on Saturday, it's going to get much more. And she hesitated, and I said, look, at the end of the day, it's your decision. My job is to put the opportunities in front of you and tell you what it's worth. Sold for $719.
Wow.
Yeah, but we had the opportunity to buy it within that range.
That's frustrating.
So it's, you know, like for me, it's my job is really to just kind of inform and make that confident decision. But if you know that market well, you can see value in it straight away.
Now listen, Felix, just before we let you go, let's just pretend everyone watching right now is your client, and they're saying, Felix, best value for buck suburb in Sydney.
This is a great question.
Like, what's going to have the best growth?
Literally.
Like, what's the lowest area I can, like, I'm tight for money, what's the lowest area?
Asking for a friend.
Give me the suburb. Just like, if you're allowed to, what suburb would you...
Look, I think 650 is probably where a lot of people are comfortable at. I think anywhere along that southwest and western corridor, which is going to really grow from that new Badgers Creek Airport, is where you want to position yourself, and buy something with land, but buy with land where you can put that second dwelling, or you can renovate cosmetically or do something to it, because ultimately at the end of the day, when that airport grows and then you've got a parcel of land, you can redevelop it at your pace. So you're controlling how you want that property to grow, as opposed to just waiting for the economy to grow. So I'm all about how you can cosmetically or structurally add value to a property.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that in those particular areas and they're still quite affordable, you have that scope behind you.
So, and you said it needs to be bigger than 450 metres squared too.
450 for a granny flat. If you're looking at duplex sites, a rule of thumb is probably 600.
600.
Yeah.
Okay, you heard it here first. Badgers
Taking that down.
600,000.
Taking that down.
Yeah.
You got 600? All right. We're done. Thank you, Felix, Dan.
No worries.
Nance, I would thank you, but we just came here to
we
learn.
kind of, literally, we're just here to learn.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate you guys heaps.
No worries, Drew. Thank you for your time.